Over the past couple videos, we've been working on getting CloudKit set up, up on the dashboard and our backend, all that stuff. Well, in this video, we're finally going to start communicating with all that stuff and pulling this down into our app. And we're going to do that through something called the CloudKit Manager. Now, some developers call these, factories, helpers. I've always just called them managers. Maybe there's some technical nuance between the two. I just kind of consider them the same thing. So that's why I called it CloudKit Manager. And essentially what our CloudKit Manager will be is it's just a file that is going to be the communication layer between our app and CloudKit. So essentially our app is going to say, hey, CloudKit Manager, I need a list of DDG locations so I can show it on the screen. CloudKit Manager is going to be like, all right, let me go talk to CloudKit. It goes, talks to CloudKit, gets all the records, all the DDG location records we created, gets those records from CloudKit, and then the CloudKit Manager is going to convert those records to DDG location objects and then give that back to our app. So again, it's kind of like the communication layer in between our app and CloudKit. So let's start building that. So go to the dub-dub-grub folder, right click, new group, and I'm going to call this utilities. Like there's a question mark on the teleprompter, and with some hesitation because you got to be careful with these utilities folders because they can become just a catch-all for all kinds of stuff. So if you find your utilities folder is getting crazy, ours won't get crazy, but in your project, if it does, maybe think about reorganizing this. But I usually have a utilities folder, but I have subfolders within that to help organize it. And for example, like extensions, those usually go in my utilities folder, for me anyway. And as always, project and file organization, highly subjective. So I'm just showing you how I do it. If you don't like it, do your own thing or take what you like, leave what you don't. I'm not claiming this is the best way. This is just how I've always done it. Okay, so in the utilities folder, do a command N for a new file, Swift file, hit next. It's going to be called CloudKit Manager. There you go, hit create. And we have an empty file here. I'll make this a little bigger. Of course, import CloudKit. Of course, we're going to need that. And then there's going to be a struct called CloudKit Manager. And the first thing we're going to add is a function called getLocations. Right? Eventually, this CloudKit Manager will have all kinds of stuff, right? Like fetch users checked into a location, save profile, download profile. Again, all the communication we're going to need to do with CloudKit is going to be done via our CloudKit Manager. So the first function we're going to create here is a static func, and I'll get into why we're doing statics on a struct in a second. Let me finish this function signature because there's a lot going on in this function signature and it's tricky to explain. So it's going to be get locations. I shouldn't say it's a lot. It's the pretty standard network call stuff. And then we're going to have a completion handler called completed. That is going to be at escaping. And then we get back a result, right? And that result is going to be a generic. It's going to return two values, a success value and then a failure value. So the success value we get back from this will be an array of DDG location. And then the failure will be an error. And then this returns void. Oh, that's how you do a return. And I always go with, well, let me get my open and closing brackets so Xcode doesn't yell at me. I always do void because, you can do the open and close parentheses like that. I don't know. I just find that I've always been tripped up by okay, which closing parenthesis, correlates to what? I don't know. I've just always found void clears things up for me in the function signature. Purely subjective, do you? But let me go back and go over this, right? So this is pretty typical to a standard network call. If you've written a lot of network calls, right? Get locations. Here's our completion handler. We're going to get a result type back. On success, give me an array of DDG locations. On failure, go ahead and give me the error, and it returns void. And then in here is where we're going to basically build up our query for CloudKit and then make the call to CloudKit. So like I said, let query equals CK query, right? This is not a CK operation. Okay, so actually that's a good point. Let me back up a little bit. For this particular network call to CloudKit, we're going to be using the convenience API. If you remember in the terms, right, we had CK operations that, is very customizable, configurable. You can do a lot of stuff. There's a lot of power behind that. But on top of that, there's a convenience API that is much more simpler syntax and handles a lot of the common stuff we're going to do. For example, retrieving a list of something, very common operation. So we're going to use the convenience API for that. In future videos, we will dive into CK operation and I can show you the power of that. But for now, baby steps, we're going to start using the convenience API. So that's why we're not going to use CK query operation or anything like that. So it is just a CK query. And you can see that takes a record type and a predicate. And the record type will be a string of DDG location. We're going to fix that real quick while we're here. And then NS predicate, you just initialize an NS predicate with a value, and you see value takes a Boolean, and that Boolean is true. And essentially what we're saying with this predicate is give me all of DDG location, right? Not just some of them, just give me everything that's a DDG location. Now, you'll notice like we've had to type this string twice now, right? Here in our record type, we typed it. And then if we go to model mock data, we typed it here. And spoiler alert, it's not going to be the last time we're going to have to type out a record type. So I don't want to have to retype this string every time. Again, that can lead to typos, errors, not working. So again, in this utilities folder, do a command N. I have one of these in every one of my projects. Of course, it's the constants file. Hit create. This is kind of a catch-all for a lot of stuff like this, where I'm going to go enum record type static let location equal, and then DDG location. And then I guess while we're here, because we are going to have to use it for the profile, static let profile equal DDG profile. So, and then of course I'm going to line up those equal signs. So we're going to add more stuff to this constants file later, but this is the type of stuff that I put in there. Rather than having like little stuff like this, in their own file, kind of, will clutter up the app. I tend to put them in this constants file. You'll see this kind of grow throughout the project. But now back to our CloudKit manager. Instead of typing out DDG location, we can do record type dot location. And then while we're here, mock data, just to, keep things nice and clean, record type dot location there. Okay, back to the CloudKit manager. So here we go. We have our query. Like I said, query the record type, which is location, the predicate, give me all of them. So this is the basic query that we're going to use to make our call to CloudKit. However, we're going to tweak this a little bit because we want our locations to be in alphabetical order, just to show you how you can sort stuff. So above the query, I'm going to say let sort descriptor equal ns sort descriptor. You're going to see we get the initializer of give me a key, and then do I want it ascending or descending, right? So the key we want, right, we've done these keys before, is we want to sort by the name, alphabetical order. You can imagine, maybe this would take a little more code and be a little more complex, but you can imagine a scenario we'd want to sort our list by how many people are checked into each one, right? Show the most popular locations at the top. We're not going to do that in this app. That's actually pretty complex. So we're going to start by sorting them alphabetically. So the key is DDG location dot k name, right? Remember we created those constants, just in case you forgot. Back to DDG location. It's these constants, which again map to the keys on our DDG location object up in the CloudKit dashboard. So we wanted to sort by name. So if we go back to CloudKit, DDG location dot k name. Of course, you could have done this, right? Typing out name, not a big deal. I get it. But again, for consistency, using the constants, just to make sure we don't make any errors, absolutely sure we're going to use that. And then ascending is true, right? If you wanted it reverse alphabetical order, you'd make that false. So that is our sort descriptor, and you're getting all kinds of errors saying we're not using these yet. So here on our query, we can do query.sort descriptors. And you see it's plural, and you can see it takes in an array of sort descriptors. So you can, you could have multiple sorts, right? Maybe you sort alphabetically and then sort by how many people are checked in, or vice versa, whatever. You can kind of like have layers of your sorting. So sort descriptors, it is an array, so we got to pass in that array there, and then just sort descriptor that we created up here on line 13. So now our query is set up. We have our sort descriptor on it. Now let's use it. Okay, so return a couple times. We'll do CK container, right? So this is the main container of our app, right? So now we're going to the container. Default, we didn't create a custom container. We're just using the default container for our app. And then now public database, public cloud database, I'm sorry. So if you remember when I talked about the overview of, CloudKit, how your app works, right? You have a container, you have a private database, a public database, a shared. You can see how we access that, right? We went to the container, then we went to the public database in the container. Now we're going to do .perform, and then we want to do down here in zone completion handler. You can see here, it takes in a query, if you see right there. So that's the query we created. Let me hit return here. We'll pass in our query, and then in zone with, remember I said you can create zones if you wanted to compartmentalize your data more. We didn't do that, so we're going to do nil. I wish this would have a default value of nil so I could like delete that, but it doesn't. And it gives me an error if I do that. So that would be nice. And you can hit return in the completion handler to kind of get this autofill. And this is, the old way of doing network calls. So this would be a records, because if you notice that was an array of records. And then error is error, right? Where you get back two objects, they're both optional, and then you have to handle the error, like make sure the error is not nil before you move on. This is how you used to handle all the network calls before result was a thing, and I think result was in Swift 5.0, 5.1. Who knows? They're all blurring together now. So what we're going to get back here from this call is either an array of records, which will be our DDG location records, or an error. And again, we have to check for nils here because again, they're optional. So the first thing we're going to do is guard error equals nil. So basically we're saying make sure error is nil before you move on. And if error is not nil, then we go into else. And then here you're gonna have to return because the guard statement has to have a return. But here's where we're going to handle the error. So we'll call our completion handler completed. And then this takes in the failure case, right? Remember our result either gives a success or a failure. And on a side note, like I know I'm not really diving into result. I'll put a link to my YouTube video that explains it in the description. Because again, this is an intermediate course. I am assuming a little bit of knowledge, but just in case, check out that YouTube video to really dive into that topic. This is a failure, and then we're gonna pass in the error. And this is optional, but we can force unwrap that because we're doing the check right here. Now that we've kind of like handled our error essentially, we can move on to the records. And then now we're gonna do guard let records equal records, right? Just I'm gonna say force unwrapping, just some unwrapping of the optional else return. And we are just gonna return out of here because this is a little bit of a weird thing. I'm happy to get some suggestions in the comments. Again, let me do a quick note on that. Like, I don't claim to know every single detail about everything. I don't claim that my code is absolutely perfect. So I love hearing suggestions on other ways to write things in the comment down below the video. And I encourage you to do that because that also sparks a discussion, which people taking the course later on can come in and read the discussion like back and forth. Because again, there are multiple ways to do things. So just want to put that disclaimer out there. But anyway, what my issue is here is I couldn't like I initially thought about doing this, right? Okay, return, cool. And then yeah, I will do a completed, dot failure where I can pass in the error. But here, I don't have the error, right? Because if the error is not nil, we're going into here and returning the error. So by the time it gets down here, my error is nil. So like I can't really pass in an error here. So it's hard to call the completion handler right here. So, but the weird thing is like if error is not nil, that means if error is nil, that means we have records. So like records isn't gonna be nil. So I'm just doing this guard statement real quick, even though we're just returning and not saying anything, just so I'm not like force unwrapping records down here. And then should something weird happen, the app crashes. So what's gonna happen here is my app won't crash, but there'll be no data. So it's like, which is worse, right? Would you rather have your app crash or have inexplicably no data? I don't know, I'm gonna go with this route. So now that we have records, right? This is our array of DDG location records. I'm gonna write this out kind of a longer way to show you what's going on, and then we're gonna do a bit of refactoring to really clean it up here. So what I'm gonna do is say var locations, and that is of type DDG, an array of DDG locations, initialize that with an empty array, and then we're gonna do a typical for loop. So for record in records. So basically iterate through all the records we have, and then we'll say let location equal DDG location. We'll initialize that with a record. Now you're starting to see why we made this initializer, because through all of our calls, we're getting records back, and it's so much easier to just pass in a record rather than try to initialize all the properties here. So the record we're gonna pass in is the record that we're iterating over. And then we'll do locations.append. I guess we could have done that in one line, but I wanted to explain it. Location. Right? So for every record that we get back, create a location from it, and then append that location to our locations array. And then once you're done there, we'll call completed.success this time, and then see it takes an array of DDG locations, which is our locations. Like I said, we're gonna write this in a much shorter way, but I wanted to do that the long way to spell out like what was happening. So let me do a quick run through of this real quick, and then we'll test it, and we should be getting back our array of locations. So again, here on line 13, we're creating our sort descriptor by the key. So we're saying, hey, sort this by name. And if you remember in our CloudKit, remember we made name sortable. So we're good here. If you didn't make name sortable, this wouldn't work. Then we create our query. We're saying, hey, query the record type location. and then give me all of them is what this predicate says. And then we add our sort descriptors to the query, which again is basically alphabetical. If you wanted to get good with your naming, you could have named this alphabetical sort or something like that. Just to be clear, probably should have done that, but hey. And then now we make our kind of actual network call. So CK container on the public database, perform query in the default zone. We're going to get back an optional records or an optional error, depending on how the call went. If it went bad, we're going to get back an error. So then we're going to call our completion handler, pass up the error, be good. If it went good, we're going to have our records, and then we're going to iterate through those records, create a location from each one of those records, append it to our array of locations here, and then call completed to pass up our array of DDG locations. So that's what's going on here. Now, let's use this. If I go to views, screens, location map view, we'll get rid of the preview. We don't need that. It's just taking up space. So now in the location map view, and again, we're just doing this to test. This is not how it's going to work, in the final version here. So on the Z stack, if you do on appear, right? So when this appears, we're going to call it, make this network call. We can do cloud kit manager.get locations. And you see, we get the completion handler, hit return to kind of auto-complete that, and then just type result here. And that will be the result object. Remember, if we go back to Cloud Kit Manager, this result object that has a success and a failure case, that's what we just did there, in case you're not familiar. So now we can switch off of that result, that success and failure case. So we'll do switch result, and then I always like to let Xcode yell at me because I'm lazy. Switch must be exhaustive, and then I say, give me all my cases, right? That way I don't have to type it out. I always do that. So in the success case here, we're going to do let locations, right? Because we get back an array of locations. And then here we can do let error because we get back an error. So in the success case, I'm just going to print locations for now. Of course, we'll do some stuff later, but I just want to make sure we're getting it, right? This is kind of my flow. Like when I do my network calls, let me make sure I'm getting back the data I think I'm going to get before I start working with that data. And then here we'll do print error.localized description. So let's run this, and you should see a bunch of stuff in your console printout. Okay, so there you go. Cool. Okay, let me make this real big. Bunch of gibberish, right? But if we scroll up to the very top, you can see it's an array of dub-dub-grub locations, right? We have our CK record ID. We have our record name. We have the name, AC Kitchen and Lounge. We have the description, throw your pallet. Cool. And you can see we have that for everything. So we have successfully received our data from CloudKit. So good to go there. In future videos, we'll work with it, make it look nice, all that good stuff. But I want to make sure I can communicate with CloudKit first before I move on. So to wrap up this video, we're going to do a little bit of refactoring. So remember I said this for loop here, we're going to get rid of. Well, to do that, I want to create an extension on CK record that just automatically converts a record to a DDG location, or it'll automatically convert a record to a DDG profile. Because again, you're kind of seeing like we always get records back whenever we make these calls to CloudKit. So I want to be able to quickly convert the record into a DDG location. So to do that, go to your extensions folder here, Command N, new Swift file, call this CK record plus ext, hit create. Cool. Of course, we're going to have to import CloudKit and then extension CK record. Okay, and then the function we're going to create here is func convert to DDG profile, and it returns a DDG, well, not profile, location. I'm getting ahead of myself. Location, and then it does return a DDG location. And it's pretty simple, right? We just do DDG location record self. So what that means is we're initializing a DDG location from self, which is whatever CK record we're calling this on. And you notice I don't have to do return, right? That's probably what you're used to seeing. I believe in Swift 5.1, 5.2, I think 5.1. When you only return one thing like this, you can omit the return keyword. So I like to do that. And to make it like super neat and clean for these little like helper functions, I like to put it all on one line. I think that reads pretty neat. And what I'm going to do here, because we're going to need this later, copy, paste, and instead of convert to DDG location, convert to DDG profile, and it returns a DDG profile. And then our DDG profile initializer also takes in a record. Remember, we built that. So now we can basically do the same thing for DDG profile. So now let's put these in action so you can see like why we did this. So back to our CloudKit manager here. I'm just going to comment out all this stuff that we did right here, just so you can still see it. And then I'm going to do let locations equal records.map. And you see we're going to map this here, and we'll do $0. I'll explain this here in a second. Convert to DDG location. And then now we can just do completed locations. So essentially what map does is map iterates through the array and makes a change to every single one of the objects as it iterates to it. So the change we're making to all of our records is we want to convert it to DDG location. That's why we put an extension on the record, because this is essentially saying instead of $0, it's basically like record.convert to DDG location. But $0 means like as you're iterating through the array. So basically that's what's happening there, and that's why we created this, and you'll see this will come in handy very much so. So we basically replaced, this little for loop and 4 or 5 lines of code with just that, and it kind of really cleans up our network call here. And you'll notice like they can get a lot simpler. This is the power of the convenience API, because we added a sort descriptor, but you can imagine if we, got rid of those 2 sort descriptor lines, we basically just create your query, call it there, handle the error, pass back the success case, right? Not too difficult, but put those back on, and then as always, let's test this to make sure our convert to DDG location is working. Let's not make any assumptions here. And yes, in our printout, you see we get the same thing that we got before, so that is working. Let's calm you down a little bit. Okay, so that is the start of our CloudKit manager. Again, this is going to grow and build as we do stuff, but in the next 2 videos, we're gonna start laying some foundations, kind of like we did with this CloudKit manager, right? I got this started, we're gonna be adding on this throughout the course. Well, in the next video, we're going to create the foundations for our alerts, because right now that we have like a real network call, now we got to start, handling the errors and showing the alerts. So we're going to lay the foundation for that. And then the video after that, we're going to start laying the foundation for MVVM. So let's keep it moving.